Well, good morning and welcome to the 8th Annual Learning and Teaching Conference. I'm delighted to see so many people here, and I hope you've been following the advice on the screens. So to start us off this morning, I'm delighted that we have once again our principal, Professor Anton Muscatelli, who'll say a few words to open the conference. So, Anton.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to be here to open this 8th Learning and Teaching Conference. I can't actually quite believe that we've got to 8 of these conferences. I think they've become an annual fixture in the university. It's also great, by the way, to welcome, I gather there's about 25 delegates from other higher education institutions, so a very warm welcome to the university, to you too. But it's great that this conference has become such a fixture and so successful. I think in many respects it underlines the importance that we give to Glasgow to learning and teaching. And I think, again, the attendance today, which Frank tells me is the highest we've had yet, I think proves that point. I think this conference always reinforces the sense in which it's good and beneficial. And indeed, I think it's vital to take time out to reflect and consider how we teach and how our students learn in today's world and in the world of tomorrow. We are very proud of the commitment that the University of Glasgow has shown to teaching across the years and the consistent evidence that it's something that we do well. I'm always conscious of the dedication of my colleagues here at Glasgow in the way they will work with students to create an exciting and progressive learning environment. And I think that shows through in everything that we hear from student surveys and other student feedback. But I know that events like these are important also because they help to reinforce that we can never be complacent, because learning and teaching and the technological background, the know-how of learning and teaching is something which is very dynamic. It's a very dynamic space where the possibilities, the capabilities and capacities to teach and learn really change all the time. Add to that we're probably are entering an extremely exciting time for learning and teaching in Glasgow, because, as I'll say in a moment, the future is certainly not dull. So it's a really good time to stand back and reflect on the way in which we teach and learn at the University of Glasgow and see what we can learn from our experience. One of the most exciting things that is happening at the university at the moment is, of course, our commitment as part of our campus redevelopment. In really the first element of that will be the development of a major new learning and teaching hub. And it's not simply a set of lecture theatres, it is a learning and teaching hub. And Frank is the project sponsor for that and is leading that. I think it also says very clearly, the fact that we've put that as the priority project, I think says, again, something very clear about where this university positions learning and teaching and its strategic priorities. And we have a really good opportunity. In fact, it's an absolutely unique opportunity in our recent history to think about creating a new and vibrant space there. But in planning and thinking about how we design the spaces around the learning and teaching hub, it's really what we're going to do there and how we're going to teach, which is important. The space has to follow the practice, and therefore it's really important that we're having this learning and teaching conference at a time when Frank and his colleagues and staff and students here present, many of them here today, will be planning those spaces. But as I said, we're not really starting our development of that hub from a standing start. There's already been tremendous strides and developments and innovative approaches to learning and teaching here at the university, and they're making their mark. For instance, and just one example is that we've been investing quite heavily in online learning and developing online degree programs, and I know that that's progressing well. It's happening across the colleges, interest in online learning, both through MOOCs and, as I say, online degrees. And it'll be great to see some of these courses being launched this year and the year after. We've remained committed to placing the learner at the centre in everything that we do here at the university, so that we can understand and better meet their needs. Hence our interest, our commitment, not only in online learning, but in using what we learn about the provision of online learning for blended learning and to enhance the learning experience here on campus in Glasgow. And for what is becoming an increasingly diverse and increasingly international student community. But we know that if that's to be achieved, then that if we are to enhance our learning environment and deliver effective quality and innovation, then really we must work to build a strong and supportive environment, not just for the learner, but for our staff, for our colleagues, for our teachers and our support teams. So I think it's really important that we build a community of learning that is supporting research-led teaching, which is a core principle for us at the University of Glasgow. We've always stressed that it is research-led teaching that we provide, given the nature of our university. We truly value teaching and we have great esteem for our teachers, but it has to be linked to the great research that we provide here as a university. The other thing that we have to do, I think, and reflect on is our inclusive approach, something which really does mark Glasgow out, and it's something that we're very proud of. We're inclusive not only in terms of the socio-economic diversity of our student population, and most of you know that if you have been in Glasgow, that a large proportion of our student comes from the less affluent parts of Scotland. But we're also very diverse because we're increasingly international as a community, and our teaching is delivered in different ways in different places. We've increased, for instance, our transnational education, and we'd like to bring those overseas hubs much closer to what we're doing here on campus as well, through new techniques and new approaches to learning. And we want to learn from what we do in places like Singapore and China and the way we teach there for what we do here in Glasgow. So I think it's really fundamental because of all that we develop a community of learning. The experiences that we have in our different schools are all very different, given the fact that we're all dealing with a different cross-section of that very diverse and international community. So a collaborative approach where we have academics, students and support staff coming together, blending together to create and sustain a place that lives and breathes the importance of learning and teaching. And I hope that that's what a conference like this will definitely help to nurture. And we know too that this has been supported also through the physical infrastructure of the highest quality, not only through the Learning and Teaching Hub, because that's a hugely important development, but also in the development of our existing spaces as well. And again, Frank and his team have, through the last few years, informed the university what those priorities are. And again, having a conference like this, learning about the needs of development in these teaching spaces will be hugely important. We've also got to look at our procedures, our processes, our protocols to make sure that they don't hinder the progress of learning and teaching. And again, it can be very helpful to hear from you, our colleagues, and indeed our students, to see where our processes perhaps are standing in the way of progress in learning and teaching. So I do hope that, again, that's something of that comes out as well. I think I've said enough, but I just wanted to leave you with 3 E's, which I think are important in a conference like this as you reflect on learning, and that is empowering, enabling, and enhancing. I hope that you really have an opportunity to reflect on these concepts, because to me, as far as learning and teaching is concerned, it's about the importance that learning and teaching can have for people's lives. It can be empowering, it can be absolutely transforming and empowering, it can be life-enabling, and in fact, learning can be life-enhancing. And I hope you'll reflect on that as you go through the conference. And I wish you a really good and successful conference. Thank you, Frank.
So one of the things that I get to do is probably tell you the less exciting things, some of the housekeeping associated with the conference. I should say that one of the things I learned at a very early stage, if you're going to talk in public and you're going to have speech notes, never, ever, ever, ever print them double-sided. And as you'll see, anything could happen this morning. So if I suddenly go off track, you'll know that I've turned the page in the wrong direction. So first of all, fire safety. We're not expecting a fire alarm, but if the fire alarm were to sound, then what you'll hear is a continuous electronic sounder. If that should happen at any point during the day while we're assembled here in the Butte Hall, please exit via the fire exits at the front and rear of this room, go down the main staircase and make your way through the archways to the assembly point at the south flagpole overlooking Kelvin Grove Park. So that's out in that direction. In terms of your program today, if you've managed to have a look at it, you'll find a personalized program, and that program will highlight the sessions that you signed up for when you registered, together with the times of the sessions and the venues that they're taking part in. The other thing that I would draw to your attention is that we once again have a Twitter feed going. So if you'd like to follow the conference Twitter feed, you'll find a note of the hashtag in your conference folder. We've done something a bit unusual this year with the conference, because every year we're actually approached by potential sponsors. And we've decided this year to give that a go. So this year the conference is sponsored by Cengage Learning, and they're going to be based on the dais all day today. Cengage is a leading provider of innovative teaching, learning and research solutions for the academic, professional and library markets worldwide. They're very proud to be the sole sponsor of our conference, and they would invite all delegates to come to their stand, discuss their current needs and challenges and learn more about Cengage. So please take advantage of that opportunity during the day. Anton mentioned the Learning and Teaching Hub and the fact that this is a major opportunity for the university. I can't underline how much of an opportunity this is. It really is the chance to look critically at the way we deliver our teaching, the way we support students in their study and their learning, and to begin, if you like, a revolution in the way that this university delivers its teaching and supports learning. As part of the ongoing development process for the Hub, we've got consultation processes running. And at the moment, we're doing a consultation on teaching spaces. And actually, there will be a stall situated outside at the registration area that will ask for your views on how we configure teaching spaces. So please take the opportunity to give your view, because we want to get as much information as we can in shaping our thinking. The other thing I would highlight is that another departure from previous years is that we are going to have a Best Presentation Award, and that's sponsored by Cengage. So at the close of the conference, we will be making an award for the best presentation at the conference. So no pressure to all the presenters out there. One of the great benefits of this conference, of course, is the fact that it brings people together. It gives you the opportunity, and actually the slide up here says it perfectly, it gives you the opportunity to meet people from across the university that you've never met before, to have a discussion with them, to share experience with them, and that actually helps us as a university to move forward, because it spreads expertise in the institution. This year, as Anton said, it's the highest attendance ever. We actually have 299 delegates attending the conference. And I have to say that personally, I've been delighted to see the fact that the numbers have grown year on year. When we started this, we had about 120 people coming to this event. 299 is really is amazing, actually. We're getting to the point where we're going to have to start turning people away. But as ever, I'd also like to extend my personal welcome to those who have come here from other institutions. So we've got colleagues today from Glasgow International College, from Glasgow School of Art, from Scotland's University Rural College, from the University of Edinburgh, St Andrews, Robert Gordon University, the Royal Literary Fund, and the Quality Assurance Agency. We're absolutely delighted to have you here with us, and please take advantage of the opportunity to interact with colleagues from across this university and the other bodies that are here. In your pack, you'll also find a feedback form, and for those that have been coming to this event for a number of years, you'll have seen it evolve. We actually evolve it on the basis of the feedback, so we do listen to what you tell us, and so we're very keen to get any views you have on how the conference runs this year. Every year when I stand here, I find myself saying that this is an exciting time for the university. But actually, it is an exciting time for the university. We've already mentioned the Learning and Teaching Hub. That, I think, is going to be the focal point for a lot of activity over the next few years, because it's going to take a number of years to build this thing. But we've got so many other things going on as well. So in the next week or so, and I do apologize to those who put a bid into this process, in the next week or so we will be announcing which MOOCs we're going to fund centrally from the University Central Fund. I expect to be able to make that announcement by the end of next week. We would expect to fund at least another 4, but actually I suspect we'll be supporting 6 or 7 through a variety of mechanisms. So we're learning from the MOOC process. We're doing more interesting things with it. So when we started off, we really didn't know what to expect with MOOCs. We certainly didn't believe that it would be the end of education as we knew it, but we wanted to use it as a learning process. And I think we're only beginning to really understand what we can do with these. And to give you some examples, some of the MOOCs that have been proposed are doing things like using the MOOCs as crowdsourcing methods to support research. Some of them are using them for public engagement for research contracts. We've got people using them as a learning environment, a very different type of learning environment. We've got a whole range of different things happening with these MOOCs. And what we hope to do is translate some of that into our practice here on campus and also in our online paid-for programs. Anton mentioned that through our blended and online project, we're advancing master's programs, online master's programs. We expect to launch a raft of those this summer, and the expectation is that we'll launch more the following summer and more the summer after that. And as we do, we'll build expertise in the institution in supporting online learning. And again, we'll be using much of that expertise to create flexibility in terms of the student journey on campus. So that in itself has really high potential. We're also nearing the end of our consultation on the new learning and teaching strategy. For me, it's been a great pleasure to meet many of you in the consultation sessions that we've had, to read the materials that have come to me either through private emails or through the SharePoint site. And I think we're now seeing some clear messages from the community, because what I want from this strategy is a strategy that we all recognise as one that will help the University of Glasgow to move forward. We want to make sure that, for example, the recognition structures for staff are right. We want to make sure that innovation that is evidence-based is properly supported. We want to make sure that we create space for development. We want to make sure that we create space for scholarship. We want to make sure that our facilities are absolutely cutting edge and enable you to teach in the way that you want to teach. There are a whole range of things that I think we can capture. And as I've said many times in public fora, strategies can do 2 things. They can sit on a shelf gathering dust as a paper document, or they can enable us to invest in the right places. And I think what we've seen through the e-learning strategy is that we've used that strategy to allow us to make investment. The learning and teaching strategy will be the same. We'll use it to shape future investment in our environment. And this event today is another important part of our journey, because in the programme, which I have to say is a terrific programme, and of course I can't sort of finish without mentioning the 2 great keynotes that we've got today, both at the start and the end of the programme. I think we're very fortunate to have attracted these 2 individuals to the university to speak to you today. But if you look across the breadth of the program, it highlights the breadth of this university. It highlights the quality and the innovative nature of what we do. And it does provide a wonderful platform for the sharing of best practice. So I'm going to finish by saying to you a very simple thing. Enjoy your day, because I know that I'm going to. Thank you. So it's now my very great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker. The title of the presentation is, "If we learn like that, why do we teach like this?" And the presenter is Professor Bob Duke from the University of Texas in Austin. I'm not going to say too much about the presentation because you've got that in your pack, and I'm going to let Bob speak for himself. What I will do is tell you a bit about Bob. So he's the Marlene and Morton Meyerson Centennial Professor and Head of Music and Human Learning at the University of Texas at Austin, where he's a University Distinguished Teaching Professor, Elizabeth Chateau Massey Distinguished Fellow in Teacher Education, and the Director of the Center for Music Learning. He also directs the Psychology of Learning program at the Colburn Conservatory of Music in Los Angeles. His research on human learning and behavior spans multiple disciplines, including motor skill learning, cognitive psychology, and neuroscience. So this is going to be an interesting one. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand down here instead of up there, if that's all right with all of you. I have to thank Frank and Jane and Heather and Fiona and everyone who took part in arranging for my being here today. It's a real privilege to be here at the University of Glasgow, and a wonderful visit that I've had the past couple days, enjoying your beautiful city. And I really appreciate the weather on Sunday. Somebody arranged for it to be absolutely beautiful. I took the train up to Loch Lomond and walked around that day. It was just gorgeous, just lovely. So anyway, it's a real privilege to be here. Several people asked whether they think anyone followed my instructions. So if you're not sitting next to someone you've not yet met, I'll ask you to move in just a moment. But for right now, we're going to let you sit where you are. I want to tell you a little bit about the title of my talk. Often when I'm asked to give talks, and even when I go into a classroom at the University of Texas, rooms are set up very much like this, with a bunch of people sitting in chairs facing somebody, talking to them, and pointing to slides. And we're so committed to this at the University of Texas at Austin. In many of our rooms, we've actually bolted the chairs to the floor. And I want to suggest to you that this is not an optimal learning environment. And a little bit of truth in advertising, since Glasgow has already bought my ticket and flown me over here. You're not going to learn anything from me in this room today. Not because I won't be fascinating, but because you're not going to be busy enough to be learning anything in this room. And if any learning takes place about what I discussed with you over the next hour, it will happen after this hour is over, and you're out in the hallway talking to one another, or you start to think about a course that you're teaching or maybe teaching in the future, and start to apply some of the ideas that I might have suggested to you today to that. That's when the learning will begin. This isn't the learning part. This is just listening. Now, I'm going to have you do a little bit with one another in just a moment, but right now, this is something that is often described and conceived not only by teachers but by learners as well, as this is the time when we're learning. And I have to tell you, I gave a talk very similar to this at the opening of a neuroscience conference that was held on our campus last fall. And I said just that. I said, no one's going to learn anything from me today. And a very prominent neuroscientist who was in the auditorium during the Q&A at the end said, I totally disagree with you about what I enjoyed your lecture. I'm sure I learned something today. And we had a lovely argument about that. But one of the things that I often ask people to think about is an hour from now, 2 hours from now, at lunchtime, and you're speaking to someone who wasn't in the room today with me, and somebody said, well, what was that talk about? Most of what you will remember will be something like this. Well, he was from the States, and he talked about learning and brains, and that's it. You're done. Now, not because you're not taking notes, not because you're not paying attention, but the idea of incorporating knowledge into our existing knowledge is a process that requires effort on the part of the learner. And often, when students are sitting, even attentively sitting, listening to a lecture, their perception is, I'm learning this right now. And especially if they're listening to a good lecture with lucid explanations of difficult ideas, students think to themselves, I really understood that. When really what they've done is watched me understand it. And following along with my lucid explanation is not the same as understanding it. And all of us as human beings, not just our students, one of the nice things about human beings is we're much more alike than we are different. And even though our students might think, you know, I've learned something in that, their threshold for understanding is much too low. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to think about today is how to create opportunities throughout every learning experience where students have opportunities to generate things on their own that reveal gaps in their understanding that might be otherwise obscure. And I'll show you some examples of that in just a minute. I'm going to start by showing you a video recording. Since I'm a musician, I'm going to show you a little music. It's about 2 minutes and 20 seconds long, so you can adjust your attention spans accordingly. Many of you have probably seen this because it has close to 70 million hits on YouTube now. So we'll go ahead and play it and we'll talk after it's over. Now, if you're not touched by that, you have no soul. Now, being a musician, if I was asked to adjudicate that performance, I would find many flaws. All of the strings of the ukulele don't ring with a clear tone. He also often loses tempo when he scratches his nose. He doesn't know any of the words. He's just making up things that sound like English words. He's Japanese. He doesn't speak any English at all. But I would argue to exhaustion with anyone who wanted to say to me that child didn't understand what music is for, which is to convey things to other human beings. Now, let me tell you how I found out about this video. One of my doctoral students sent me this about 5 years ago and said, you got to see this. Somebody locked a kid in a closet with a ukulele. Because it looks like he's in a closet. But what's interesting to me about this is that, as I did a little bit of research about where this came from, this guy's father had read an announcement that Japanese public television was going to offer a series of beginning ukulele lessons on television. And he went out and bought 2 ukuleles, one for himself and one for his son, and together they learned to play the ukulele. And this is the result. Now, what I'm saying about the flaws and understanding what music is for, you can generalize that same idea to lots of things that we teach in primary and secondary school and at university. You know, when we teach writing to students, we often imagine that they understand fully that the purpose of writing is to teach a reader something about what you're writing about, or to move a reader in some way emotionally. But often that's not what I find undergraduate students doing. And I'll tell you one anecdote about a doctoral student I had about 25 years ago, very fine pianist, a lovely teacher, not a particularly gifted writer. And she came to my office, and we were working on this research report, and she was struggling and trying to write well, and I was struggling trying to help her write well, and we were both very frustrated. And I don't know what moved me to do this, but I said on a Friday afternoon, I said, I want you to go home this afternoon and write a letter to your mother explaining this project. Now, I didn't know what I would get from that, and this is when, before email, and people used to actually write letters with writing utensils, I don't know if you remember that or not, but so she went home, she came back Monday, showed me the letter she had written to her mother. It was the best writing of hers I'd ever seen. Not because she was writing to her mother, but it was one of the few times that she was actually writing with a reader in mind. So she had to think to herself, well, what does my mother already understand about the ideas that I'm putting together in this project? What do I need to explain? What questions will she pose that I'm not going to be there to answer, so I have to anticipate those questions and then include the responses to those questions in what I write. So now my task as a writer is much different than many undergraduates who are asked to write a paper, and if you're in a class with someone who wrote the definitive text on the late quartets of Beethoven, and somebody says, write a paper on the Grosse Fuge, who are you writing to? I mean, you're not going to teach anything to your professor, so you do what many students do. You collect as much information as you can, jam it into the paper in some configuration, hoping that what's in the paper is something that the professor would hope would be in the paper, and you'll get a good grade. That's not the way people write in real life. Right? When we write a grant, when we write a research article, when we write prose or poetry, our idea is that someone's going to read this. And we're imagining what we want those people to be thinking about and understanding and learning from what we write. And I'll pursue this sort of line all the way through what we go today. I'm going to show you on the next slide the least favorite questions I hear from undergraduate students at the beginning of the semester. The last one is my least favorite. No, we just kind of goofed around. It's better you didn't come, actually. Now, the thing is, I want to suggest to you that those questions are adaptive responses. We teach students to ask those questions, right? And if I were to translate some of those questions into more precise language, when a student asks, Dr. Duke, how long does this paper need to be? What they're really asking is, Dr. Duke, how short could I possibly make this paper and still get the grade that I want? So actually what this does is set up a situation where students are really imagining how little work I can possibly do to earn whatever grade I'm trying to make. Now, that's a bad model for education, right? I mean, it's interesting that often people, I don't know if this is true in the UK, but in the States, we start using language of business in talking about education, like we're the service providers and students are the consumers, and which I think is a terrible metaphor for learning, because all of us know that business relationships are inherently adversarial, right? When I'm negotiating with somebody in a business transaction, I'm trying to give as little of my money as possible to get as much in return from the person who's selling something to me, and vice versa if I happen to be the seller, right? That's a terrible metaphor for how to think about teaching and learning. Right? I'm your teacher, I'm your parent, I'm your caregiver, and I want to give as much as I can to get you as far as I can get you, right? And I'm hoping that you're going to give as much as you can in return. But once it becomes a situation where you and I are bartering to see how little you can give and how little I can give to get as much as I can out of the other person, that's not a good way to start out in a learning environment. We're all very fortunate to have this 3 pounds of goo in our heads. The typical human brain, it's now thought, has upwards of 86 billion neurons, that billion with a B. And those 86 billion neurons make up to 100 trillion connections with one another. Now, those are unimaginably large numbers for human beings, because as our brains evolved, we don't have the capacity to intuitively understand numbers that large. As human brains were evolving, we evolved to understand there's nothing there, there's something there, there's a few things there, well, there's a lot of stuff there. That's about as sophisticated as our intuitive number sense is. So the idea of a billion or a trillion is unimaginable to us. And I often use this as a metaphor to get students to kind of think about what that's like. If I were to set a metronome at 60 beats a minute, at once per second, and I could go back in time 1,000,000 seconds, how long ago do you think it would be 1,000,000 seconds ago? I won't make you say it out loud, just think about it. It'd be 11 days ago. That's how many seconds, that's how long it takes to get back 1,000,000 seconds. If I went back 1,000,000,000 seconds, how long ago do you think it would be? It would be 31 years ago. That's how much more 1,000,000,000 is than 1,000,000. And if I went back 1,000,000,000,000 seconds, it would be the year 29,000 BC, right? By the way, the national debt of the United States is $13 trillion, so just saying. Now, we expect this wonderful organ, the most complex machine in the known universe, to do things that involve the three words that I have up there. I mean, obviously, right now, when you're sitting in this space, there are signals that are coming into your sense receptors, to your auditory receptors, your visual receptors, your tactile receptors, olfactory receptors, all of which have to be encoded in some way from the actual outside environment into something that can be stored electrochemically in your brain. Right? So some encoding process has to take to translate what's in the outside world into that medium. Right? And certainly we want that stuff, at least some of that stuff, to stay. So the idea is that we can get it out again when we want to retrieve it at a time when it's advantageous to do so. But I want to ask a couple things about this for you to think about. And the first is, how much of our day, from the time we wake in the morning to the time we go to sleep at night, is completely forgotten? Right now, the current thinking in psychology is that the psychological present, what we imagine as now, is a window of about 3 seconds in duration. So for about 3 seconds is now, and then that 3 seconds is then, and there's a new now. And in a typical waking day for an adult, we have about 20,000 nows that we experience, most of which are completely forgotten. I would have no advantage of remembering the people I passed on the street walking from my hotel this morning. There would be no advantage in remembering exactly what words Frank and I spoke when we were meeting this morning. I have the gist of it in my head, but I don't have the exact language that was said, right? So all this stuff is completely forgotten. So the question you have to ask is, what would motivate a brain to remember something? Now, that's especially consequential when we think about how organic memories work and how different they are from the memories that we also often use to compare organic brains to. I mean, all of us work with computers all the time. We know our computers have memory systems, and we often use that as a metaphor for talking about organic brains. So when you're at your computer and you're working and you decide to save something and you hit the save command, what your computer does, it looks for a blank space on your drive. It writes what you want to save to that space, and by write, I mean little binary switches flip from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1 in some configuration that represents the stuff that you save. It puts an address on it with the idea in mind that when you come back and want to recall that and you click on the icon, the computer will go read the address, it'll read off what's on the drive. Now, that's pretty clear, and organic brains don't work anything like that for a number of reasons. First of all, there are no blank spaces in our brains. There's an advertisement in the United States by a clothing company that says, man uses only 10% of his brain, don't dress like it. And there's a movie that came out with Scarlett Johansson, I can't remember the name now, who somehow only uses a part of her brain, as most humans do, and then she finds out how to use all of her brain, and now she sort of takes over the world. I didn't see the movie, but I heard it was great. But what's interesting about that is our brains are in use all the time, all of it. And often when we look at pictures of magnetic resonance imaging and we see those pretty colors lighting up and most of the brain is gray and there are a couple colors in red and blue and yellow, we tend to think, well, the gray part is dormant and the other stuff that's lighting up is the part that's busy. Actually, it's all busy all the time. Right? So that's one thing that differentiates organic brains from computer brains. The other thing is, when we save something to a computer, what's already on the drive, barring some malfunction, has absolutely no effect on the stuff that we save. Not only that, what we put on the drive after that stuff that we saved at that moment will have no effect on the stuff that we saved. That's nothing like organic brains. Right now, all of you in this room, all 300 of us in this room, are experiencing right now differently from the person sitting next to you. Not only because you're in a different position and you have a different visual perspective, or you have a different auditory perspective, or your chair feels different, or your scarf is scratchy, whatever it happens to be. Everyone's experiencing this moment different than the person sitting next to you, because you came into this room with a different set of memories already in your head. And what your brain is working very hard to do right now is figure out, what does right now have to do with that? Now that's an interesting thing to think about, because we imagine if we have a bunch of human beings in the same room at the same time and we tell them the same things and show them the same things, they've all had a shared experience that's very much alike. But that experience is colored by what memories are already in their minds before the experience begins. So the assumption that if everyone is in a room and they're all experiencing the same thing, they're all thinking the same things about that, is a mistaken assumption. Now, what's consequential about this with the computer memory, again, barring a malfunction, is that what you remember of today when you walk out of this room will change based on what happens to you subsequent to this hour. So memory is a terribly dynamic thing. It's not a static thing where we have information, we put it in, it stays there. When we need it, we go and get it out. That's not the way memories work. And interestingly, I've given a number of talks for medical schools, and there's no better place in the United States that represents the idea that learning is a matter of transferring information from one memory system to another than medical education in the United States, which is, if you're in med school, you go to your virology lecture for virology week, you read the big virology book with the idea in mind that we're going to put all this virology in your head, and then when it's time to get it out, years later when you're on rounds and a patient presents with a certain set of symptoms, you'll go into your head, you'll get your virology out and pull it out and make some diagnosis. That's not the way memories work. It's not the way brains work. And now in the past, I would say the past 5 to 10 years, medical education in the United States is coming around to that idea and changing the way we think about how we incorporate information into the minds of future physicians. I'm going to shift to a different photograph here. This is actually a picture of a living brain that was taken with a technique called diffusion tensor imaging. And what this is a picture of is the actual pathways of axons in a living brain. And let me orient you to the picture just a little bit. This is the forehead over here. Here's the left ear about here. Here's the back of the head, top of the head. Here's the neck and spinal cord going down into the neck. The green pathways are running front to back, the blue top to bottom, and the red are in the z-axis moving in and out of the screen. Now, one of the things that this illustrates really effectively is how interconnected all of the parts of the brain that dominate in certain kinds of cognitive activities are. If you want to see a number of these images, if you look at the humanconnectomeproject.org, you can find a lot of these beautiful images here. But what this illustrates, and I think in a very powerful way, is how interconnected all the parts of our brains are. And we advantage learning when we make people use information in a way that pulls all of these things together. Now, that's a difficult task because often when I talk to colleagues of mine, not only at Texas but at other institutions as well, the thought that they have is, well, listen, I've got so much information that I need to present to my students. I don't have time to have them fooling around while they're in the room with me. They need to do that on their own. I need to get this information across to them. And I hope what this conference today, not just my talk but other talks as well, will shift your thinking about is how little information you need to present before you allow people to start actually working with the information and working with the ideas in a way that makes it an ongoing part of their thinking. A couple more brain images that are really fascinating. This is a study that was published in 2004, and as part of this project, the researchers at MIT had taken photographs of 13 individuals' brains from the time they were 5 years old to the time that they were 20. And what this image shows, by the way, this is looking down on the top of the head here. Here's the forehead. Here's the back of the head. This is the top of the head here. Here looking the front. Here's the right ear over on this side. So these are the same brains just shown from two different images. And the false colors here are a metaphor for, did I just do that? Sorry. Are a metaphor for how much white matter is actually developing in the brain. Now, many of you probably know that when we're born, our brain is comprised primarily of gray matter, which means those are the cell bodies. And over the course of our lifespan, insulating material, myelin that's developed by cells, support cells called astrocytes in the brain, develops that actually insulates those axonal paths that I showed you on the previous slide. So I'm going to show you this little movie that I made of this child, or this average of 13 children, developing from age 5 to age 20. Here we go. It's so cool, I'm going to show it to you again. And what I'd like you to ask to think about is, what part of the brain develops last? We'll do it one more time. Now, if I show you a static picture of what you just saw, you can see these things juxtaposed. And when you look at this from age 5, 8, 12, 16, and 20, which part of the brain develops last? And many of you are noticing, I'm not going to actually say it out loud, is the front part here, right? You know what lives here? Judgment. This is why 16-year-olds have very high car insurance costs. Because those of us who are adults, right, when we're on an open road in the middle of the night in the dark and it's straight, and when you're 16 years old, you're thinking, I wonder how fast I could get this car to go, right? There's nothing up here to say, yes, but that would be stupid, right? But as an adult, we probably, decide not to do that. Now, the thing that's important about this is this development doesn't finish until people reach their mid-20s. So many of our undergraduate students are neurophysically not done cooking yet. Right? Now that's something to consider, because we again imagine that we're dealing with human beings that are just like us, and as long as we do the things that we think we would learn by doing, then they will learn just as well and in a very similar way. So not only are they different experientially, they're different physiologically as well, even in the brain. As you know, I teach at the University of Texas at Austin, and we're known for many things, and one of the things we're known for, to sometimes our chagrin, is our athletic department, which is very prominent. And when our sports teams play on television in the US, we often show a little 10-second video, which all Division I universities do in the United States, to sort of tout how cool our university is. So I'm going to play this one for you now. They stopped playing this in the late 1990s, which I was sad about it because I thought it was so great, because what it expresses is the audacity of Texas. You might be able to tell from my voice, I'm not from Texas. I'm from the East Coast of the United States, and if you told me 31 years ago that I would spend 30 years in Texas, I would have said you're out of your mind, but I've grown to love the oddness of it. But again, well, I just want to say more. I'll just let you watch the video. Here we go.
We don't claim to be able to change the world. We just change people. And then they change the world. We're Texas.
Now, come on. Who don't want to go to school there? I mean, we got the steel guitar, and that voice is that of Walter Cronkite, who's an alum, actually, the trusted man in American news, We got breakfast tacos. It's a great place. Now, whenever that was playing in the 90s, and I would be at some gathering with the then provost and then president, that was several provosts and presidents ago, and I would say, that ad we're playing on TV right now, we just change people? How do we know that? And there was a lot of silence. And I said, and by the way, and how do we know we're changing them the way we're intending to change them? And the honest answer is, well, we don't have any idea. Really? I mean, we bring them into rooms like this, we talk to them, we show them things, we ask them questions, we ask them to show us things, and we're making assumptions about we're changing them in a particular way that we intend to be changing them. Except, I'm not really sure we know what we're doing when we're saying that. Right? So the question that I ask you to think about today, and now this gets to what I'm going to ask you to do, hopefully that you're sitting next to somebody that you've not yet met, I'm going to ask you to do something now for a minute. So if you would have something to write with, or if you can type something for this, I'm going to ask you to do a task now. Now see, many of you are looking at me like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a lecture, I'm not supposed to be doing anything. Oh, you're going to do something, so get a piece of paper, and what I'd like you to do is to think about, in your discipline, what are the 3 most interesting and far-reaching ideas in your discipline? Right? What are the 3 most interesting and far-reaching ideas in your discipline? And I'd like you to write those down succinctly. And I'll give you about 1.5 minutes to do that, or maybe 2. The 3 most interesting and far-reaching ideas in your discipline. I appreciate your indulging me. I'd like you all now to quietly stand at your seat. What the heck? Now, if you are wedged in between people who already know your discipline very well, I'd like you to turn around or find a place that someone doesn't know your discipline very well, and I'd like you to explain to them the most interesting of those 3 most interesting ideas. I want you to do that in about 3 minutes. Your task as you're listening is to come up with 2 penetrating questions that help the speaker elaborate the ideas that they're saying, all right? And then, when I give you a signal, I'd like you to switch, and the speaker becomes the listener, and the listener becomes the speaker, and has to come up with 2 penetrating questions. Okay, so this whole thing is going to take 6 minutes. I'll stand up there to let you know when it's time to switch, and then the most important thing, I'll stand up there again when it's time to stop. Okay? Go. Now, I want to suggest to you Thank you. If you would take your seats, please, that'd be lovely. And some of you I know want to continue this discussion as soon as this talk is over during tea. So, I promise you that's the coolest thing that'll happen this whole hour. And I want to suggest something to you. That should happen in every class, every day. Now, I don't have too many $5 tips that I say about teaching, but here's one. When you're sitting next to a person that you sit with every day in class, and you know this person and you're friends, and a teacher gives you an assignment like talk about some idea, discussion quickly turns to lunch. When you're talking to people whom you don't usually talk to, it's a different kind of interaction. And even large classes start to feel smaller when the task of learners in the class every day is to come meet somebody in the class they've not yet met. And now you have a different kind of classroom. Even though it's very large, now students get to know each other's names. You get to know students' names. And all of you who are describing ideas that you know very well, I'm sure learn something by describing those ideas to somebody you've not described them to before. So by generating ideas on your own, by generating things on your own, you've now changed your memory of the ideas that you have in your head. That doesn't happen without a learner or anyone generating things on their own. Because of course, as you were talking to your colleagues and you were explaining something, I'm sure some of them asked you questions that you'd not thought about before. My colleague Steven Weinberg, who is a Nobel Prize winner who's in our physics department, told me one time that the best idea he ever had came to him while he was teaching a room full of undergraduate students. There is something that's important about interacting with other people verbally, either in writing or in speech, that teaches you something about what you understand and what you don't understand. And I'm going to show you an example of what happens when people don't do that often enough. The film I'm about to show you, some of you may have seen, it was taken, this is a part of a study that was done at the graduation ceremonies at Harvard and MIT in the mid-90s. The name of the film is down at the bottom. If you'd like to see it, you can stream it online for free. But I'll just play this and we'll talk about it after it's over. It's about 2 minutes long as well.
Graduates of Harvard and MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
We are the premier engineering and science institution in the world.
Do you think you could light a bulb with a battery and wire? Do you think you could light a bulb with a battery and wire?
Yeah. Light a bulb with a battery and a wire. Maybe. Yes.
All right.
Definitely.
Do you think you can light a bulb with a battery and a wire?
Battery and wire? Well, yes, why not?
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, can you do that?
The interesting part about the batteries and bulbs question is that people always predict that they can do it. Students say, of course I can do this.
Any hints I should have here?
Teachers say, of course my students can do this.
Ow! Do you know why that didn't work?
I have no idea.
Battery could be dead, the bulb could be bad, I'm hooking it up totally incorrectly. I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. But if I had to guess, I would say it's operator error.
Okay.
I know it's possible, but I don't know how to do it.
It's only after failing that you begin to get upset with the question and think, well, maybe it's a trick question, maybe this has something to do with manipulating the wires. They couldn't hold all the wires together.
You don't have a current if you only have one wire. You need to complete a closed circuit.
But that's not the case.
Oh, well, if I do it with a little light bulb, I just do this. In which case, the light just lights up.
It goes to the fundamental understanding of electricity. If one cannot light a light bulb with a battery and wire, then everything built upon those basic ideas has problems.
You know, whenever I show this, I give the opening talk on teaching at Texas for our new faculty seminar that happens every August. And I say, I'm not saying this to disparage MIT, and all my colleagues from Stanford say, please go disparage MIT. Now, they didn't look for the 6 dullest people at graduation. This film is depicting a small subset of a larger sample of students who were asked many kinds of questions like this, not just with batteries and light bulbs, but they were asked, for example, why are there seasons on the Earth? And many people knew it had something to do with the tilt of the Earth's axis, and some people even knew it was 23.5 degrees. I'm not sure that's right, but I think it's in the ballpark. And people would say things like, well, you know, in the summer, in the northern hemisphere, the Earth is tilted toward the sun, so it's a little closer. And then 6 months later, we've revolved around the sun. We're on the other side. The northern hemisphere is still tilting away from the sun, so a little bit farther away, and then it's winter. Now, that's a very reasonable answer. It's wrong, but it's very reasonable because, of course, it doesn't take into account that we're 93 million miles away from the sun, and the Earth's diameter is, what, 8,000 miles? So when you go like that, how much closer do you get? Well, not enough for summer, right? So they would ask somebody who gave that answer, well, what's your major? And they'd say, I'm in astrophysics, right? And the responses were just like this. Now, my favorite response is the woman who says, I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. Well, like, oh, wires, that's another department. That's but she does say it's probably operator error, which many of you know is engineer speak for it's probably my fault, right? But what's interesting about this is that I'm sure that every one of the students depicted in that film could calculate fluctuating voltages in a circuit to many significant digits using integral calculus. But you give them a light bulb and a battery and a piece of wire, and when did we have this, right? Now, I have to say, when the people who didn't know how to do the task were shown the solution, I mean, they didn't go, yeah, I still don't get it. They said, oh, yeah, I should have thought of that. But the fact that that didn't come to them on their own reveals something about their thinking and the way they conceive of the subject matter. So just to bring it home, I'm going to ask, well, actually, I'm going to skip over this slide because I want to come back to that in a minute. I'm just looking at my time here. I'd like you all to solve this problem in your head. Just take a moment. Okay, would someone please raise your hand and volunteer an answer? Okay, I have to make a teaching moment here. There's 300 people in this room, like 4 people raise their hand. Now, the question I ask you all to think about is, for those of you who are not raising your hand, why aren't you raising your hand? And the answer is the same reason your students don't raise their hand when you ask a question. Because, well, what if I got it wrong? I mean, what if I raised my hand and you called on me and I said 3/8 and you said, well, actually it's not 3/8. Then what? But you know and I know that if you did raise your hand today and I did call on you and you did say 3/8 and I said, no, I'm sorry, it's not 3/8, that would be the defining event of this week. Right? You'd be laying in bed in the dark on Saturday night staring at the ceiling and go, God, why did I raise my hand on Tuesday? Now, that is intensely perverse. But I want to tell you, you learned that in school. Right? You learned that in school. And I'll come to that in just a second. Okay, so somebody who bravely volunteered, would you tell me your name, sir? Dominic. So, Dominic, what's the answer to that? 1.5. So Dominic says 1.5, which is correct, right? Now I will ask Dominic and everyone else, how did you get to 1 and 1.5? How did you get from that to 1.5? Great. You invert and multiply, right, Dominic? And this is the universal symbol for that equation, right? You do that. So Dominic says you do that, and then you multiply across, and you get 6/4, and you reduce a fraction, you get 1.5. Now, the question I would ask Dominic and everyone else is, why do you invert the divisor in that fraction? Now, many of you who aren't raising your hands because you might be wrong. It's that you have no idea, right? And I don't know when they teach this in the UK. In the US, children learn that in like 4th grade, or perhaps 3rd or 4th grade. Now, and all of us have done hundreds of problems like that in our school experience. And even only the odd-numbered answers were in the back of the book, so we've at least done 50s of problems like this in our past experience. And I want to suggest to you that if the goal of an institution is to get rooms full of individuals getting the right answer for that problem, one way to do that is to put lots of equations just like that on a page and have people with different numbers in them and have people practice going, as Dominic says, invert and multiply, invert and multiply, invert and multiply. And you'll get a room full of people all getting the right answer with no requirement that they actually understand what the heck is going on. Now, that is pervasive in education. Because what students are thinking about when they walk into our classroom for the first time is, what do I need to do to get the answers right? And if you're a good teacher, you will show me exactly how to do that. And because I'm a good student, I will remember what you showed me, and when you ask me to do it, I will do it. And what isn't a part of thinking in those situations is the value of confusion in learning. I had the privilege of working at one of the greatest research universities in the United States. The state of Texas pays me an exorbitant salary to be confused most of the time, right? Because I'm researching questions that no one's found the answer to yet. And it's confusing. And I really, most of the time, I'm just trying stuff out. I'm not really sure what I'm doing, right? But that process is how I learn. It's how all of us learn. When we find ourselves in situations that are outside of an institution and we're just learning in a natural environment, you think about how much error making goes into those experiences, right? That doesn't happen when we do things like this. I'm going to leave you with a problem today that I'm going to ask you to think about when you can talk to each other about it during the day. Here's the scenario. There are 8 identical cubes. They're about 2 inches square. They all weigh exactly the same. They look exactly the same. They're undifferentiable, except in one of the cubes is a wadded up 100-pound note. And the other cubes are just paper. Now the paper that's in the other 8 cubes is just a little bit lighter than the 100-pound note. But it's not so much lighter that you could tell by feel which cube has the note and which ones have the paper. So your task is to find out which of those 9 cubes has the 100-pound note in it. Right? Now, to make this interesting, I'm going to give you a balance scale to help you find that, because the difference in weight can be detected by a balance scale. So again, there's no numbers on the scale, it just tells you which side of the scale is heavier. But here's the challenge. You can only use the scale twice. So you can put something on one side of the scale, something on the other side to figure out which one is which, but you can only use the scale twice. Right? Now, we're not going to do it right now, but maybe I will take this right now. Just take a minute, 1 minute, and silently see if you can figure that out. And by the way, you can determine to a certainty which cube has the 100-pound note. Just take a moment to think about that. Again, you can only use the scale twice. Okay, we're a little bit short of a minute, but I'm a little bit short of time, so I'm going to stop. Now, I want to tell you, right now, this room is every classroom, right? Because there are some people in here who got it, and they're really happy, and they can't wait to tell somebody else, all right? There are some people who can't get it, but they don't want to be told anything. There are some people who can't get it, and they welcome being told how to do it. And there are some people thinking, this is stupid, right? This is every class. Right? Now, the thing that's interesting about this to me is that many of you who tried this and didn't get to a solution got stuck. And now we're at the place where I hope you'll think about this throughout the rest of the day, when the theme of this conference is learning in a changing world. Right? Because what makes flexibility that allows you to function in a changing world is knowing what to do when you get stuck. Now, one of the challenges that I'm going to ask you to think about, if you don't yet have a solution for this, don't let anyone tell you. And keep working on it. Now, I tell you, I showed this at a conference to teachers back last summer. There were about 800 people in this room. I showed this thing, and I started to move on to the next slide, and this one teacher raised her hand and said, well, what's the answer? I said, I'm not going to tell you. She was angry, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do when you're the teacher. Things are confusing, and you unconfuse them, right? Now the thing is, that's a challenging thing as a teacher, because all of us became teachers not because, I don't know why we became teachers, but usually because we like people and we want to help them and those kinds of things. And of course, if I see someone in my class who's looking confused and they have a furrowed brow and a look on their face, I want to come unconfuse them. And when I unconfuse them, they smile at me because now they're not confused anymore, and I'm smiling because they're smiling at me, and I feel great, and we leave the room thinking, God, teaching's happening, except they didn't learn anything from that. They just listened to my explanation. And often what we miss when we're imagining developing productive learning attitudes in learners is that emotion is as much a part of learning as any fact or any physical procedure. If you don't have a productive attitude as a learner, when you get stuck, you're out of business, right? You can never be independent because most situations that you're going to be confronted with are going to put you in a situation where eventually you're going to get stuck. And then what happens, right? How do we get to a situation where we can get ourselves unstuck? Okay, I'm going to leave this problem now. Please don't be angry. This is one of my favorite phrases that I made up in the past year. Is we don't want to just confuse people. We want to create strategic confusion, right? So I just don't want to throw people in the weeds when they have no way to find their way out. But I want to create situations in the classroom every day where people are productively confused. Right? Now, of course, different people have different tolerances for how much confusion they will tolerate. So I have to find an optimal dissonance level for each individual, because some individuals actually can't tolerate much confusion without being very frustrated and wanting to give up. But again, I would argue that what we ought to be teaching learners is not information and not following algorithms and procedures, but how to productively engage when they're stuck. Most people, I think, as evidenced by our division by a fraction problem here, have an aversion to error making. But all of us, when we learned everything in our lives outside of school, learned in an environment that was full of error making, right? And what I'd like you to think about right now is that the longer we prepare people to perform a task without letting them actually engage in the task, the perceived dissonance, that is how bothered they're going to be by not being able to do it, increases over time. I wanted to get a screenshot of this before I came today, but I didn't do it, I'm afraid. I'm 60 years old, and sometimes when I'm sitting on an airplane, I take out my phone, and with a little slingshot, I send colored birds through the air to kill green pigs who have stolen the birds' eggs. Now, I'll do this for a very long time. I mean, an embarrassingly long time. Now, why am I doing that? Because the authors of Angry Birds understand exactly what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't experienced Angry Birds, what's wrong with you? Go to the App Store like right now and get that. But what I want to say that I want to show a screenshot of, the first screen of Angry Birds when you first buy the game is a cartoon of a human finger pulling back a slingshot with a little colored bird in it, and over here is a pig that has some eggs by it. That's it. And then you start. Now, how is that sufficient for somebody to know what to do? Well, once you start flipping that little slingshot and you see where birds go, you're learning because you're experiencing all this error making. But you know how the game starts? The game starts with one bird, one pig, and almost anything you do, the bird's going to kill the pig. But then after a couple rounds, now there are two pigs. And then one of the pigs is under a piece of wood. And now you get a different kind of bird that goes through wood, right? And very strategically, the game keeps me optimally confused, right? So the question you're asking yourself as a teacher, how do I set up situations where I can decide at any entry point how to create optimal dissonance through strategic confusion? And I'll leave you with this last metaphor that kind of makes this case. I often ride around Austin and see children of this age on bicycles with training wheels. And often the bicycles and the training wheels are set incorrectly, like this young girl's are set incorrectly here. Because as you can see, the rear wheel of the bicycle and the training wheels are all touching the ground at the same time. Now, right now, this girl can learn nothing about balance on a bicycle because where she shifts her center of gravity has absolutely no effect on the angle of the bike. So there's no error making in this because the bicycle is set up so you can't make an error, right? Now, this young boy, it is a boy in this picture, but by the way, you see that this training wheel is a couple inches off the ground, right? Such that The bicycle, when the boy shifts the center of gravity, can shift from one side to the other. So he makes errors, but he can't make a catastrophic error because the training wheel will stop him before he hits the ground. But what's important about this picture is that without the error making, there'll be no learning, right? What happens in the generating of things, right? We see a situation where now somebody experiences what happens when I move from one side to the other. I see that my movements have an effect on the angle of the bicycle, and yet I can learn in an environment where the errors are not consequential. School should be just like that, and not like that. This is very comforting for a learner, right? Because a learner wants to know, tell me exactly what to do, tell me exactly how to do this, I will do it, I'll remember it, and then I'll show you that I remember it later on, right? But imagine a situation where instead, there are so many frequent opportunities for learners to attempt generating things on their own, where they're not exactly sure what they're supposed to be doing, that they develop a habit of embarking on things when they're not yet certain of what they're supposed to do. And that uncertainty actually reveals to them not only gaps in their understanding, but pathways to understanding more deeply that otherwise would be obscure. I could go on for a long time, but this is probably a good place to stop. I want to thank you, Frank and Jane and everyone for having me here. Thank you all for your good attention this morning. Enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you.